The Dana Girls Mystery Stories, number 24, The Secret of Lost Lake, by Carolyn Keene. Copyright 1963, Grosset and Dunlap. Chapter 1, A Missing Baron. The diesel engines strained a little on the Rocky Mountain grade as Louise and Jean Dana gazed in fascination from the train compartment at the abruptly changing landscape. "This area," said the slender, bespectacled gentleman seated opposite them, "is dinosaur country." "Do you mean those mammoth prehistoric reptiles lived here?" asked Miss Harriet Dana, the girl's aunt who was traveling east with them. "Yes, they roamed all over this place," said Professor Carrie Nesbitt, curator at a San Francisco museum. The girls had met him recently. "No one is sure why they died out, but one theory is that the glaciers overpowered them. Dinosaurs were pretty dumb creatures. Their brains were very small compared to their 70-foot-long bodies and 20-ton weight." Jean grinned. "Tall reptiles for tall mountains. How I'd love to find some fossil bones." The conversation in the closed compartment was interrupted by a low bark. It came from a handsome German shepherd dog lying on the floor at their feet. The Danas had received special permission to keep him with them. "What's the matter, Baron?" Louise asked him. "Tired of being shut in here? Well, next time the train stops, we'll go for a run." She explained to the professor, who had come from another car to visit, that Baron Otto von Necker was a famous show dog. The girls were taking him to his new owner in New York. Aunt Harriet sighed. "I'll be glad when the responsibility is over and we can go home. We've been on vacation for so long. Thanksgiving will soon be here," she said, looking out at the patches of snow on the ranch lands and distant mountains. Jean asked the professor to tell them more about the countryside. The tall, distinguished-looking man smiled. "The area south of here is full of mystery." Instantly, the girls were alert. More than anything else, 18-year-old brunette Louise and her blonde sister, a year younger, enjoyed solving mysteries. From the time of the strange case of By the Light of the Study Lamp to the recent Sierra Gold mystery, the Danas had been involved in several challenging adventures. "What kind of mysteries?" Louise asked. "Well, the most interesting to me concerns Lost Lake. Once there was a—" At this instant, the train came to a sudden, jarring halt. The compartment door flew open and baggage shifted about. Baron gave a yelp of pain. Jean found herself in Professor Nesbitt's lap, while Louise collided with Aunt Harriet. Quickly, the group disentangled itself, and Miss Dana asked, "Is everyone all right?" They confessed to being shaken, and Jean and the professor had bruises from having bumped into each other. But otherwise, the four travelers were all right. From the forward car came groans and cries for help. "Perhaps we can give some first aid," Louise suggested. "Let's go see." Professor Nesbitt decided to return to his own car to help and said goodbye. At that very moment, Jean cried out, "Baron is gone!" Aunt Harriet looked worried. "Oh dear, I hope he didn't get scared and run away. I'll never forgive myself if that valuable dog is lost." Louise began to call and whistle for Baron. He did not come. Thinking the dog might be in another car, she and her sister hurried to the end of the car. The outer door stood open. "Baron probably went outside," Jean said. She hurried down the steps and looked around. The dog was not in sight. She called him several times, but Baron did not appear. "Look," said Louise, joining her sister. "I see dog prints in that patch of snow." The marks were unmistakable, freshly made prints. How far away did they lead? "What'll we do?" asked Jean. "If we follow them, the train might pull out before we get back. we'd be stranded. But losing Baron, Louise began, then said, let's go forward and find out what happened and exactly when the train will leave. By this time, most of the passengers had come outside and were milling about, talking excitedly. Louise and Jean learned from the conductor that a journal on the first engine had overheated and burned off, ripping up part of the track. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured, the conductor stated. A doctor on board is attending to a few with minor injuries and hysteria. I'm glad the wreck was no worse, said Louise. How long do you think we'll be here? We've sent for a wrecking crew, but it'll be several hours before we can pull out, the conductor said. Help's coming from Green River. Louise explained about the lost dog and said the girls would like to search for him. Okay, but be back within 4 hours, the train man advised. The sisters hurried to tell Aunt Harriet. After hearing their plan, she said, All right, but I'm going with you. She and the girls put on warm coats and walking shoes. As they left the train, Jean remarked that Baron's prints led south. The 3 Danas had no trouble following them through one patch of snow after another. Part of the way led through comparatively flat land with sheep grazing in the distance. The crisp, clean air afforded a long view ahead. Baron was not in sight. The girls called and whistled, thinking the dog might be lying down or even drinking in an irrigation ditch. He failed to respond. The tracks led up and down a butte, which Louise and Jean climbed, while Miss Dana skirted the base. Her nieces waited until she joined them. All sat down to rest. What do you think was in Baron's mind? Jean asked. Freedom, Aunt Harriet answered. There are no other animal tracks, so he wasn't after a rabbit or a squirrel, and none of the Rocky Mountain lions was bothering him. Louise shuddered at the last remark. Baron might be able to defend himself, but he might be scarred or incapacitated, so he could never be a show dog again. Shall we go? Jean urged. The 3 arose and trekked on. After an hour's walk, they saw a ranch house nestled at the foot of a small mountain. Baron's tracks lead right to it, Jean cried out excitedly. We found him! Louise and Aunt Harriet were excited too, but not so positive as Jean. Nevertheless, all 3 hurried toward the ranch house. A dog began to bark a warning of their approach. That's not Baron, Louise stated. As she spoke, a large white sheepdog bounded toward the Danas. Hello, old girl, Jean said in greeting. Where's your master? Discovering that the callers were friendly, the dog led them to the kitchen door of the house. It opened, and a smiling, weather-beaten man of 60 stepped out. His hair had the slightest hint of gray, and his smile of welcome was warm. I reckon you folks were in that train wreck, he said. Heard it over the radio. But if you don't mind telling me, what made you take such a long walk? My goodness, John Strong, said a woman behind him. Why don't you invite the folks in? They're probably about ready to drop. Mr. Strong chuckled heartily. You're right, Martha. I'm forgetting my manners entirely. Please come in. He stepped aside, revealing a small, pretty woman his age. After the Danas introduced themselves to the Strongs, the ranch woman ushered her callers through the large kitchen, with its shiny copper kettles hanging on the walls and a table covered with a red checkered cloth. The group entered a pleasant living room. Here the pine-paneled walls, beamed ceiling, wide-board floor, and comfortable furniture gave the room a cozy, welcoming atmosphere. Mrs. Strong immediately brought in a pot of coffee and served it with homemade cookies, biscuits, and jelly. Tell us about the wreck, she said. Before we do that, Louise spoke up. We want to tell you why we're here. A valuable German shepherd dog we were taking to New York ran away. We think we traced his paw prints here. Did you see him? Indeed we did, Mr. Strong answered. Was that your dog? Too bad we didn't tie him up. We fed him, Mrs. Strong broke in. You know it's bad luck not to feed an animal that comes to you. Her husband laughed. That's just another one of your superstitions, Martha. We'll show you folks our menagerie of helpless animals that came here, my wife's pets. In the ensuing conversation with the Strongs, it became apparent that they were a fine, lovable couple, and also that the rancher was somewhat amused by his wife's superstitious fears. Have you any idea where Baron, our dog, went? Louise asked finally. Mr. Strong pointed directly south. He was headed straight for wild country. Is that in the direction of Lost Lake? Jean asked. Yes, exactly. The Danas groaned. He'll be swallowed up in the wilderness, Jean declared. Where would we ever start looking for him? Aunt Harriet asked worriedly, what will we ever tell Baron's old and new owners? This is terrible. Mrs. Strong wagged her head sympathetically, but added the electrifying remark, I only hope that the Witch of Lost Lake doesn't get a hold of Baron. End of Chapter 1.